Welcome to Calling All Voices, brought to you by the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Karen Love, and I am the CEO of the Dementia Action Alliance. In this podcast, you will hear from people living with dementia from the Black and the LGBTQ+ communities. They'll share stories about how resilience and persistence can help people to continue to live meaningful lives, even with the diagnosis of dementia. And you'll hear participants discuss why it's important that we call all voices to share their experiences. Today's episode will feature discussion with Deborah Tan and Valene Campbell.
Well, hello, my name is Deborah Tan, and guess what? I am the host of Calling All Voices podcast. And I have with me today the wonderful, the stupendous, the lovely Valene. Welcome, Valene. How are you?
Oh, I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, you are across the pond, as they say.
Well, somewhat up north. I'm north of you.
Way up north.
Yes.
Is it cold in Canada today?
Oh, I should have you look out my window. It looks like a ski resort.
Okay.
We got hit very hard last week. We have a lot of snow right now. So, it comes with the territory for the winter season.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to have you via Zoom. So this is really cool. So Valene, I want to get right into our conversation. And I want to frame it, if you will, advocating for equity in the care and certainly the management of dementia. Can we do that? Can we just kind of focus in on that specific area? How do you feel about that?
The inequity, I definitely know there's a disparity. I can speak even personally from a personal example. There's no secret. Unfortunately, my mom is living with dementia as we speak. And just even from the perspective of our family's situation, in the sense of how it was managed in her earlier months of diagnosis, the disparity was bang right there, almost exactly to what we read about from day to day. And what I can say about that is we do know there is a disparity. There's a disparity with how Black in specifically to the Black community, how we are treated when it comes to inequity in healthcare. We're not receiving the same resources. We're not receiving the same level of care in often cases. And as I mentioned, I have a perfect example for you on that.
Wow. So you've come out of the gate really strong here. So let's talk about that. Let's unpack it just a little bit more. So we recognize that there is a problem. And you said that you first noticed it with the care with your mom who's living with
dementia as we speak. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so did you notice it right out the gate with mom?
No. At the time, I was living on the other side of the city. We're in the Toronto area, and it was a milestone birthday for my mom's aunt, and it was also a milestone birthday for myself. And we decided that we were going to travel to England to celebrate her aunt's 100th birthday. And that was my first time spending an extended period of time with mom. Of course, you do the phone calls, you do the drop-in visits throughout the week or throughout the month, let's say. And during that visit, that's when I noticed mom was highly confused. She was forgetful with some of the conversations that we had, plans that we were making for the day. I noticed mom was questioning and asking several times about the same conversations we had just had. And we traveled with a small group of other relatives, cousins, and I noticed when we were walking, perhaps anytime, maybe sightseeing or what have you, in the airport, mom wasn't reading signs. She was walking on her own path. And it was just really challenging to see her confusion. So that's what I noticed. When we returned home, I spoke with my family. I let them know what I observed. And I think at that time, it actually confirmed something for my father. if you don't mind me sharing. Speaking with him, he noticed just before we went on that trip, mom had a heightened sense of anger, meaning something would happen and her level of anger would far exceed what that issue was. And he went to speak with his family doctor, took her along. He expressed what he saw, and immediately it turned into a confrontation, believe it or not physical, but it was a verbal confrontation. The physician basically told him that he knows best as the doctor. He knows what he observed and does not believe that my mom has any underlying condition.
Wow.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So afterward, my father realized, we have to seek care elsewhere, because he mentioned that he put all his faith in the family physician. This physician is supposed to be the one who forwards that request or forwards a further investigation, so that way she'll be able to see a specialist. And that was a very important part of the investigation for mom's condition, for early intervention, for care, for direction, any type of direction. But unfortunately, she was denied that at that time.
Wow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I say wow, but I hear this regularly, but to hear it time and time again, that your dad sought help. He's living with his wife, his spouse. He
Yes.
understands. He's living with it.
Yes, for over 50 years. So
exactly.
yeah,
Wow.
he would know.
He
Mm-hmm.
would know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just that sense of being dismissed.
Yes.
It's almost like a dismissal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Valene, you had shared something with me, and it was so poignant that I want you to just backtrack just a minute. You told me about your mom's packing. I want to go back to that trip, that big trip. You
Mm-hmm.
shared with me about the packing of the clothing.
Yeah.
Share that with my audience, please.
Oh, it was a very difficult situation, because I think at that time it made me realize how far she had progressed with this disease. So it wasn't that trip, it was a different trip. They were on their way to Florida. And when I say they, it was my parents. They were on their way to Florida. Of course, we know Florida is a very hot state, especially in the summertime. And mom had packed an assortment of banquet clothing, like, I mean, high end dresses, lots of sequins, lots of frills, and a lot of them were, of course, suited for warmer weather. And the suitcase was just in disarray. It was in disarray. Nothing really made sense, if that makes sense. Nothing made sense that was packed in her suitcase. There weren't enough shoes. The toiletries weren't there. Basically, the confusion that was happening in her mind, you could see that playing out in the way she packed.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because I know your dad saw that as well.
Yes.
Because
yes.
they were going on a trip together.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's fast forward just a little bit. At this point, it's clear that mom needs to see a doctor. Okay, so let's talk about the diagnostic experience. How was that? And let's keep in mind, I want you to, if it factors in, I'm not even sure if it does, let's factor in possibly equity and care management and all of that good stuff when you describe the diagnostic experience, please.
Sure. So going back to the original story that I mentioned about her visit with her initial primary physician, it was a mild screen. The question was, Mrs. Campbell, can you please can you repeat these 3 numbers to me? I'm going to tell you 3 numbers and repeat these 3 numbers in 2 minutes. So the 2 minutes elapsed and she was not able to repeat those numbers. The physician helped her. He probed her quite a bit, And with a lot of help, they finally were able to get through those 3 numbers. But even with that, it's such a basic screen, so basic. Even in that, that wasn't enough. That wasn't telling enough to say, you know what, let me ask a few more questions. Let me probe a little bit further. And as I mentioned, in addition to my father's accounts, those things weren't considered at all. So moving forward, they found a different physician, which I'm so thankful for. The family as a collective, we decided they're going to move on. And at that time, that family physician made a referral for her to see a specialist. And this specialist, dealt with mental health, dementia, Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm not sure if this was an actual geriatrician. In fact, it was a geriatrician.
Okay.
And that is when they were able to conclusively know that mom was diagnosed with dementia at the time.
Okay. So everybody kind of knew. It was just a matter of getting to the right doctor to narrow it down.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about inequity, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about inequity, how does inequity manifest in the care and management of dementia?
Well, I can tie in some of what I've already mentioned, just in the sense of when we look at some stats, in the Black community and anyone of color, the communities of color, we see that dementia is at a high rate, exponentially high rate in those communities. And some of that same research will indicate as well that we aren't receiving the care. We're not receiving the care in dementia. There are resources that are available. I am aware there are various associations and organizations that are aware, but unfortunately, from what I even personally observed, the conversation directed to the communities that are affected the most just doesn't happen. When we talk about inequity in healthcare, this is an ongoing conversation that we've had even outside of dementia. But since we're speaking of dementia, our conversations aren't believed. Our conversations are questioned. Traditionally, in communities where there are minorities, and of course the Black community, we look at old medicine. I'm talking maybe from the 1700s, 1800s. It was always determined that the Black community, people of color, were stronger. We don't feel pain. We don't, we don't carry that level of pain, and we have a high degree of tolerance for whatever reason. We know that's not true. We feel pain as everyone else does, but it seems as though that narrative still continues in medicine today. So I think from that perspective, that there is inequity still, just from that perspective. When we look at the physicians and the caretakers, the healthcare providers, let's look at physicians alone. In America, there's only 5% of African-American doctors in all of the US. That's like about 5.5%. Conversely, 52% or more with white physicians. So there's a disparity there and inequity there as well. So a lot of this dialogue will continue, or these notions, I should say, will continue unless some of that is changed. We need to see more physicians of color. Physicians need to be able to listen and understand what we say about our loved ones. There need to be more actionable steps when we speak of these changes that we're seeing with our loved one as well.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've spent some time in the research in this very subject, and I know that.
Mm-hmm.
So Valene, what changes would you like to see? What are some solutions? I know you just enumerated one. You need listen. That's a big one in and of itself. What other things would you like to see? If you could wave a wand and get exactly what you want in this dementia space, what needs to change and what solutions are needed to address these inequities? Because it's not one.
Right, right. Yes, these inequities. I want to kind of focus on some of the organizations that are available, supposedly, well, for the general public. I want to address some of those organizations. I think it's so important to have more faces that look like mine, who are in leadership positions, who speak directly to the communities that are most effective. It's so important to be able to show that representation and show that, there's a relatable factor here, right? Be more direct with how it's affecting our community. I noticed that that conversation is kind of on the quiet side. There isn't very much conversation around how dementia is directly impacting communities of color. I think it's so important that we need to highlight that and bring that to the forefront. I know still there's a lot of stigma around dementia. It's considered mental health. I think it's present for all communities, but again, in addressing it for I say communities of color, it's important to really draw that out. Also, sharing the importance of participation in the clinical trials. I'm a believer of that. We need clinical trials to understand how drugs are working, how these medications are working, how do they affect different communities and perhaps even different age groups, whatever the case may be. We need to have more of us so we know how it's going to affect our community. So that also is another factor, because there are issues of trust when it comes to the healthcare system. And we need to be able to dissolve those issues. We need to eradicate those issues of trust, present information, be forthcoming with the information, and try to recruit a little bit more from communities that have been marginalized.
Okay. Do you think poverty factors in, Valene, in terms of inequities?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's a ongoing subject matter when you look at the disparity, especially in rural communities or
Yeah.
urban communities. You'll see that a lot of the funds and the funds that are raised, they're not allocated towards the communities that have dense populations of those who are marginalized, the marginalized communities. They're not getting the funding. And of course, when you talk about poverty, that could be individual families as well. I know the issues are a little different because, as I mentioned, I'm here in Canada. Some of those things still play out. We have a socialized system here, but still, when it even comes to the funding in the hospitals, I know those in the urban communities are not getting the support that they need. So
Yeah.
it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you spoke to the urban community, but initially you said rural and then you changed the word to urban. But you know what, Valene?
Mhm.
I live in the deep south. And so when you said rural, that resonated with me, but
Mhm.
urban as well. So I actually think both communities, when it comes to inequities, is paramount. Yeah. What
Yes,
do you think?
yes. I would agree. I would agree. It's a little as I mentioned, it's a little different here in Canada, just in the sense of the population and where everyone's living and where most of the diverse communities are. The diverse communities are in very densely populated areas. Even similar to maybe in the US, there may be different
Yeah.
sections or wards. We have that. And I do know that there is an issue. There is an issue with the allocation of funds. There's just not enough funding. There's just not enough education. There's not enough education on the subject matter in those communities in particular. So there's truth to both.
Yes. I find that you're well versed. And so my question, I'm just going to sidetrack a little bit because I'm just interested. I
Mhm.
know you're well versed when it comes to equity in this whole space of dementia. if you don't mind sharing personally a thing or two that you are strongly advocating, you personally, because of your background and your knowledge and your expertise, can you share one or two things with us that puts you on the front line, so to speak?
Mhm. You know what? I'm very passionate at this time in um, again, removing the stigma. I think it's so important to continue to have these conversations, letting people know it's a safe place, letting people know that they need to have the support. This is not a disease that you can fight by yourself and fight just with you within your family unit. The support is needed because as we know the nature of this disease, it's progressive, and depending, I mean, it does play out differently for some people, but what if there's combativeness? What if there's, it just goes on there. I don't have to go through all the symptoms, but it's something that requires support, even for the caregiver. They require that support. So I want to increase the awareness. I want people to understand that when you start to see signs, don't wait. Don't question yourself about what it is you feel you're observing, because sometimes our mind will play those tricks. And I think it's important to raise those questions early so you can get the help early and get the intervention early. So that's part of my conversation.
Okay.
And also, yes, we spoke about the equity and what have you. I want there to be more awareness in communities that have been marginalized, because again, as research shows, those are the communities that are impacted disproportionately. So I think, in understanding that you can be affected, they can be affected, my community can be affected, we need to make that clear.
Okay.
So,
So let's say I reached out to you and you're going to advise me, Valene.
yeah.
How can I or individuals at large become advocates for equity in dementia care and management? What would you tell me?
How can you become an advocate?
What can I do in the effort to minimize, possibly eradicate the inequities in the space of dementia? What would you advise me? I'm an individual who want to advocate. What would you tell me?
Yeah. I would say your voice is needed. I would say that you pull together, be brave and speak up. Remove fear out of this equation, especially if there's fear in addressing a physician. We know a lot of people still end up having that white coat syndrome.
Yes.
Get rid of that.
Yeah.
It's important to trust your doctor. It's important, but at the same time, they don't live with your loved one. You lived with your loved one. So you need to be relentless on advocating on behalf of your loved one, right? Stop at nothing. And that's what I would really encourage anyone to do who wants to advocate, because they need to, doctors need to see this, hospitals need to see this, clinics need to see that we're not just numbers. The community is not just numbers. These are real people having real concern, real issues. So it's important to bring these conversations to the attention of the physicians. It's very important.
Got it. Good. Yeah, I like that advice. Yeah, thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how you're feeling about this, Valene, but do you think the church, faith-based communities, especially when you look at Black folk, do you think the church is a good resource for people in the dementia space? Why or why not?
I feel there can be improvement. Definitely. Considering the sense of community that the church brings. The church is very influential in the family structure and the unit and so on. And I can speak to that because I belong to a church family myself. However, I feel there needs to be more education when it comes to some of the leaders in the church. A pastor is a pastor. That's what they do, but they're not healthcare professionals for the most part. And I think if there are healthcare professionals within that congregation, they need to step forward and talk about these diseases. I know for a fact, my church, they try, but overall, I think it all ties back to increasing the awareness, because I think a lot of people in our community, in the Black community specifically, they're unaware of these numbers, they're unaware of these statistics. And without having that information, it almost seems like a distant thought. That connection's not made about the severity and the impact of their community. So I think there definitely can be improvement. I don't think that there's enough support. I think having a faith-based being connected to a faith-based organization such as a church is helpful for being able to build on the community that you already have, build on the prayer unit and all the things that make people come together in that church. But I definitely think there needs to be more education for the whole church on a whole. Definitely.
I agree with you. Do you think, since we're talking about the Black church, do you think there are any other Black orgs that we as Black people should be considering and looking at it in terms of disseminating information besides the Black church?
Sorry, did you say Black orgs? I wasn't.
Organizations.
Okay.
Do you think there are any other organizations that we can tap into to spread the word about or disseminating information about dementia and the hardship that it's placing on people of color?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the long-standing organizations and associations, I'm not sure if I'm able to name them, but
Go ahead.
yeah, okay. So organizations such as the Alzheimer's Association or the Alzheimer's Society, depending on where you live, there are various chapters. They are present. There's a chapter in every single state. I know for here in Canada, we have the Alzheimer's Association, and it's structured perhaps a little differently, but those conversations need to be in the forefront. We have geriatric centers. Those are really big in support of course, seniors and older adults. Those conversations need to be in the forefront as well. Some of them are traditionally owned by other communities, and with the attempt, of course, these days, trying to talk about diversity and representation, I think that term, we can't wash it over. We've been hearing it a lot lately, but it does still apply, and it applies to the organizations that we're speaking of as well. Again, having more people who look like me to represent these conversations and push this dialogue a lot further.
Okay. I hear you. Do you think that HBCUs factor in? Do you think Greek life factors in when we talk about the Black community? How do you feel about those?
That's great. I think especially because I know these Greek and fraternities and sororities and so forth, they do a lot of community work. I know that's what they're known for. And I think it would be great if they incorporate these conversations as well. I know they have various different, I guess, organizations that they support, or different, I would just say organizations that they support, but this is one that needs to be a part of their dialogue and communication as well, considering the impact in their own community, for sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like that perspective. Thank you for that. I don't know. I just asked you about advising me and possibly others, but I think there's a little different spin on this question I'm about to pose to you, because we're beginning to wrap things up.
Okay.
I want to ask you, what advice would you give to others who are looking to advocate for Black people living with dementia? You know what, Valene? to me, that's very similar to what I just asked you, because they go hand in hand. So what I would like to do, instead of posing that question to you, I know that you highlight, it seems as though, awareness,
Mhm.
people being aware. And I want to go back there just a little bit, because I think there's a little bit more to unpack when it comes to awareness.
Mhm.
So you are doing this podcast with me, and I really appreciate it. Is this a form of awareness?
Absolutely. We're having conversation. We're having conversation. And I'm sure because you're just an incredible host, the reach is quite far. Absolutely. So if even if it comes down to just dropping the seed of dialogue in someone's ear, that seed can blossom into so much more, and that person wanting to dig and so much more and learn more. So you can never stop it at this. It's one of those things that we just have to continue doing. I noticed, and I've seen it for myself over the years, I'd say over the past 10 years even, the change in people's behavior around mental health, because this is still a mental health condition. People have become a lot more sensitive about it. People have become a lot more, I'd say, understanding and supportive of those who are experiencing mental health issues or crises. And I think, yes, there's still a long way to go, but we can't stop having these conversations just for the sake of spreading the word.
Yeah. So I think I just heard you say that you just use mental health as an example,
Mhm.
parlaying it with dementia education, that if it can work over there, mental health,
Yes,
it can work over here as well. And
yes,
so
yes.
you've seen the trajectory, you've seen the traction, if you will, in with mental health, because you and I both know that there is no correlation between dementia and mental health.
No,
Now,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have
yeah,
made that clear.
no,
I'm
no, no.
saying, if we do look, you're correct in clarifying. Thank you for saying that. I'm
Mhm.
just saying,
Yes,
yes, there has been movement in
yes,
that conversation, and I've noticed the movement there. So exactly, if we
yes.
continue the conversations
Mhm.
here with dementia, as has been done in the mental health, we will move forward. We'll move forward with the understanding. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My last question, my second to my last question was, could you speak to optimism? You just did. You're optimistic that we're going to move even in the dementia space, in the inequity space as well. May I say that? Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remain optimistic if you want to
Yes,
see change, right?
yes.
So I will continue to be optimistic and partner with people as of yourself who are advocates. And that I have a children's book that talks about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and also having those conversations with the young children who are growing up, seeing a loved one, such as a grandparent living with dementia. So, when you start the conversations early, start the conversations young, again, we start to grow future advocates for dementia. So I think it's just something that we just can't stop to do.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Well, it has been wonderful chatting with you as usual.
Yes.
Do you have any
Well,
closing remarks? Perhaps I did not cover something that is burning in your heart that you need to get out. I want you to utilize this time to do so. If there's something you want to share that maybe I didn't touch upon, any closing remarks? I'm going to leave pretty much the last remarks to you.
yeah, sure, sure. Well, you know what? Just elaborating a little bit more on advocacy and how you can become an advocate. A lot of people question their voice. They question if there's any validity in the things that they have to say and they have to offer. And it may sound cliche, but there's strength in numbers. So I just encourage everyone who may have even questions, concerns, perhaps even your family member hasn't, hasn't dealt with dementia yet, you can still participate in the conversations, learn, because you know what, when we look at the number of people who are diagnosed per year in America and worldwide, it's surely going to touch, unfortunately, someone that so it's best to get ahead of it, learn how you can support that person in your life. And also, if you are a caregiver yourself, you want to make sure that you're tapping into all the resources that are made available for you as well. Again, it's something that the family has to address. This is not something that any one person can deal with on their own. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to close by saying this. Thank you for writing your book. I read your book, and your book speaks to equity. It speaks to diversity. I like how the spin that you took with the book. It was fabulous, and I want to laud you for that. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Valene Campbell. So with that said, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Do take care, all right?
Thank you, Dr. Chen. It was a pleasure speaking with you as well.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Calling All Voices. If you're interested in learning more, please see the episode notes for this podcast. In the episode notes, you can find more information about Calling All Voices and the work of the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. The creation of this podcast was sponsored by Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. The views expressed in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers, not the views of Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. If you liked what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to the series, share a review, and let others know about it.